When did signature guitars start anyway? Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Signature guitars are pretty cool. It's a way to own a piece of an artist. Now, whether you're trying to play like them, or if you just happen to like the guitar that they play, there's no denying that there is a signature guitar phenomenon that makes you play differently. Today, we're going to check out one of the earliest signature Flying V's. My friends, you're in for a real treat today. So first off, this is actually a Heritage Series Gibson case, so it's like the lift-in reissues of the 80s, because we're taking a look at a 1984 guitar today. It's not normally supposed to have this case, so that's kind of a cool upgrade that I must have gotten brand new, or they just sent it home with the wrong case. But, do you see this, my friends? It's a two-toned Flying V. We got a little bit of cream going on, we've got a little bit of black. There's only one guy, well, okay, maybe two guys you might know, but they both have the last name of Schenker. This one specifically is for Rudolf Schenker. Okay, so the Schenker brothers, they are very well known for being in the band Scorpions, and their whole signature paint scheme was the whole half black, half white thing going on. So Gibson saw that unique design and approached that band to see if they would like to have a signature finish put on their new instruments. Because you have to remember, at the time that this thing was produced, this whole body style was pretty new. Quick bit of history of Flying V's. It was first birthed in 1958, the Carina style. As you can see here, it's a beautiful piece, but vintage original ones are expensive. Even the modern day reissues are going to run you 10 grand brand new. You can also find modern day takes on them, like that blue flame top that we talked about a few nights ago. But then they disappear for a while until 1967, when it's just like the Hendrix style one that we talked about. But as far as the 70s go, they were pretty similar to the 67 style, but usually with the more rounded over headstocks. And then in the late 70s, we saw the introduction of the V2, and then eventually in the 80s, you get like the Heritage Series, which are the 58 reissue styles. But then 1983 brings the birth of the shred metal ones. You've got the Flying V as well as an Explorer. James Hetfield is well known for using the Explorers. I usually think of like Kirk Hammett on these Flying V's, but there's many people who have used these. So this was a fairly new body style. Maple necks, alder bodies, some interesting stuff going on here. It's just a little bit more stripped down from the 67 style, essentially no longer having a pick guard. So Gibson was trying to find a way to make these spicy for the 80s. That way they could sell a whole boatload of these, because they were probably relatively easy to make. Enter the Designer Series. They gave them squigglies, they gave them lines, sometimes they gave them a little bit of both, sometimes you got a space theme, sometimes they wanted to be patriotic and have some sort of a flag on them. The Designer Series was crazy, and since they were already doing crazy stuff, they approached the band Scorpions to see if they wanted to have a signature finish on one of these new guitars. So obviously, this one is for Rudolf Schenker. You've also got Matthias Jabs, who has an interesting stripe design, 3 on one side, 1 on the other. He later had an official, unofficial E90 signature in the late 90s. That is a pretty cool guitar if you want to check it out in this episode. 24 fret Explorer, shrunken down, weird proportions. Yep, it happened. So yes, indeed, this is factory original, but what's unique about these is they're usually a custom shop edition or a custom shop original, meaning it was a limited edition and or a one-off. This particular one is labeled as an original, so normally that means it's a true one-off, but that's not the case on here. I mean, sometimes it's just confusing. I've talked to Randy Leonard about that, and sometimes he thinks they just ran out of the other decals, so they used these for a little bit. So I've always thought this finish was pretty darn cool, because half and half, it's interesting. But I'm sure some people will be like, well, the one that he's most famous for using actually had a pick guard. Well, that's where things get confusing, my friends. There have been many signature guitars like this, even just within the Gibson family of brands. The first one being what we're talking about today, the 1984, 1985-ish run. You might be able to find some even later than that. But the next time they did it was about a decade later in 1993. They created 103 of them. Those ones were signed and it was a little bit more traditional. Then after that, Gibson USA did one in 2003 that had many signatures on it. However, it looks more so like a 67 style Flying V as far as construction goes. And then, another 10 years later, we get a 2013 version with apparently up to 2 options. There was a white and tortoiseshell and a white and black version. However, those had more so 70s specs to them, like the really rounded over headstock design. They were going after his original 70s Flying V rather than these 80s ones. So it seems about every 10 years we get a new one, and we're really coming up on 2023, so will there be another one? I think it's finally time we do a custom shop release. You know, a true custom shop, not just custom shop original/edition. And then I don't know too much about other brands, but I know Michael Schenker has his own signature Dean from at least 2006 that has the same paint job going on, and there's been countless other people that have copied this paint job onto their guitars. But let's just take another second here to talk about the birth of signature guitars. Is the 80s really when that starts for Gibson? No, not really. I mean, it's been going on almost since the introduction of the company. In 1952, the Les Paul is technically a signature model for Les Paul, the man himself. And then in the 60s, we had people like Barney Kessels getting signatures, the Trini Lopez. But as far as Gibson really starting to do signature guitars on solid body guitars outside of those little niche ones in the 50s and 60s, it doesn't really start to happen again until the mid-80s. And then it's the 90s when it just really takes off. Because now not only do you have a guitar that has Les Paul's name attached to it, but you also have another famous guy on top of that. So it's the signature effect, because the 90s, that's when the Slashes started to come out. That's when the Joe Perry signatures, studio and custom shop. You've got all the Ace Frehleys that eventually were birthed. And don't forget about the Jimmy Page models. So in a traditional modern sense, the 90s is where signature guitars really became a big thing. Prior to that, yes, there were a few, but it's nothing like what we consider it today. So I've been needing to document one of these 80s style Flying Vs in my current take for a while, so I thought I would pick this one up, because I've been waiting for a clean one, but they're just not that common, so I'm going to wait a little bit longer. But I thought I'd pick up this Player's Grade edition to document for the meantime. So let's go ahead and throw this one on the workbench to take a look at its parts and specs. Inside Schenker's V. So this one's actually a little bit more special as compared to all the other ones you've seen. I'm starting to understand the difference between the Custom Shop Edition and the Custom Shop Original ones. Because as you already know, original means it was a one-off, like, custom order. And I think this is the element for this one. Normally, all these style Flying Vs get Dirty Fingers pickups, which were introduced in the late 70s, and they have a double row of adjustable pole pieces. This one does not. It's got the regular slug coils. So naturally, I was pretty scared that these pickups were replaced when I first saw this thing on Reverb. But no, this is a 1984 Tim Shaw PAF. And how about our bridge pickup? It's the exact same thing. And in my opinion, Tim Shaw PAFs are way better than Dirty Fingers. Those pickups are too hot for my personal playing tastes. And these tend to sell for just a little bit more on the used market. However, just because something's era correct does not mean it's factory original. You definitely have to look in our electronics cavity. But I already have, and you'll see it later, but I'm under the impression that these are original. Within the circuit, the bridge pickup is around 7.5 k ohms. Our neck position is 7.1, and the middle, just for fun, 3.65, exactly where Tim Shaw PAF should be. But here you can see the original routes in here. You can see the alder body wood exposed. It's definitely a lot lighter color than most woods that you see Gibson use. And you get the cool black and white paint job in these cavities as well. It is a short neck tenon. As far as the bridge, it's your regular Schaller-made Nashville style one. You can always tell it's an original 70s, 80s part because it reads made in Germany down here. As with most bridges, it appears to not have its proper radius anymore. And it's my opinion that the bridge on this example has been replaced. That's not the proper casting line, but that's not really that big of a deal. So this thing cleaned up okay. Like, I had to do double layers of polishing and cleaning just to get all the gunk off of this, and I still don't have all of it off. So I don't think this thing was ever cleaned once in its life outside of just a light wipe down. But there was definitely some sort of like a sticker right here at some point in time that caused a shadow and somebody removed it. But it doesn't look like this started life as pure white. It still had a little bit of creaminess to it from the beginning. You can also see in this area, the lights are exaggerating it a bit. I mean, it's hardly even noticeable in person. It just looks like the light shining off the edge, but we've worn through to the more white finish. But we've got nicks, dings, finish checking all over this thing. So if you're looking for a collectible example, this one's not necessarily it, unless you don't mind a whole bunch of players wear, but you like the fact that it has Tim Shaw PAFs, which I do. It's just not in the condition I'm looking for my own personal collection. But you can see some scratching in this area, and all the other nicks and dings over here on the ebony side of our V. I'd say the worst thing is there's a little bit of a chip in the finish right here, which reveals a white coat. So they must paint these all white and then do the black? Not quite sure. That'd be pretty easy to touch up, but what's great is the neck completely hides that, so you really hardly ever even see it. I would say the worst thing cosmetically about this guitar is this, but I mean, that's where your hand's gonna be when you're playing. But anyways, moving on from the alder body, we have maple necks on these guys. And here's something else that can vary on these 80s style Flying Vs. You can find both ebony fretboards, like this particular one, and you can also find rosewood. Sometimes I think it was luck of the draw, sometimes maybe it's custom shop edition or custom shop original, but I've seen both on each, so look at each example very carefully is my best suggestion. But we've got 22 low wide frets, as is common in this era. And then even though I'm not a big dot inlay fan, I've always loved the 80s dots because they're just like a little bit smaller. They used a very cool acrylic material. Sure, they're still just circles, but for some reason they just look a little bit more stylized. I especially love them on the Studio Customs and Studio Standards in the Les Paul style because they have a binding that just makes them look even cooler. But I guess since this one has a white neck, it kind of looks like you have a natural black binding, I guess you could say, but you don't. Got a nut width of 1.7 inches. That increases to 2.07 by the 12th. First fret neck depth, 0.82, and by the 12th, 0.97. Now, I know that sounds big, but these are not big necks. Like, very slim, but rounded in this area. And sure, it beefs up just a tad, but it's not enough to say that that's a big neck by any means. Here's that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. Just a rounded C shape that's a little bit slim feeling. Full disclosure, if you're interested in this one, we do have a little bit of fret wear in the cowboy chord areas, but it doesn't look like it's anything that's going to affect playability right now. You could level and recrown that to be perfect. And now our headstock. Truss rod's looking good. You can see some of the original white color still underneath that. We've got a pretty nasty gouge in the headstock right here, and this one has a Schaller-made tuners. You can find a whole plethora of different tuners on these bad boys. For example, there's a pretty clean one on Reverb right now. It's got the Dirty Fingers pickups, which are pretty traditional, but it has Grover tuners, and I think that's what made that particular one a custom shop. Now let's move over to the backside. Honestly, I think I'm going to change my opinion on this. I don't think the Tim Shaws are stock now that I've taken a closer look. I mean, we've got an error-correct pot here. We can't read the date codes because everything's soldered onto here. However, normally Gibson's job is a little bit cleaner, but granted, I have not torn apart many of these 80s Flying Vs, so I could be wrong. Because most of this is looking pretty good in factory, but there's definitely something kind of strange going on here. That had to have been touched up at some point. And here's the other thing that makes me suspicious. The backplate has been completely custom made and replaced. Gibson backplates are not 3-ply like this. And the screws have been replaced with black ones. But here's one readable pot code at 1984. And you can see more of the alder body in here. So yes, nicks and dings, gouges along the edges, very common stuff for Flying Vs, but it cleaned up nicely. It's got a nice shine to it. Somebody's put Dunlop strap locks on here if you like to use those. Alder bodies are very prone to vertical finish checking. Typically vertical finish checking means you have some sort of a moisture damage, so I'm curious, is it because alder has more moisture in it and that's why they always seem to crack like this? But that is common and to be expected on these 80s Flying Vs. Moving on to our neck, we've got lots of finish checking back here. And one thing that gave me a slight heart attack. So there's a bunch of finish checking right here, but I mean, that's nothing to worry about. But this little one right here at the top it swerves around up here to the point where I thought, oh no, is that a touch-up? Because it looked just like an obvious touch-up of like a crack or repair. So I look under Blacklight, it's like, well, it Blacklights correctly, and you'll see that here in a minute. But it just ended up being dirt and grime and that finish check line just making it look like something sinister. So thankfully, everything was okay there. Well, this one comes with the Gibson branded Schaller tuners, which were kind of shortly lived in the 80s. We can see our serial number here, dating it to late 1984, Nashville production, and our beautiful custom shop original decal. Always important to Blacklight vintage guitars. You can see we've got a very nice even glow, and that's exactly what we're looking for here. Now, both of the pickup rings are actually glowing. That's not always the case, but I was hoping we'd be able to see some sort of a sticker shadow here, and we do see that there was something over here on the black side. Almost looks like some sort of a college sorority symbol or something. I don't know what was on there. It kind of looks like a triangle, maybe a witch hat. They could have had a whole bunch of things there. But here you can see some of those dings in the wear area that I was talking about earlier. Interestingly enough, our inlays glow on this one. Our headstock's looking good here. Looks like we've got some sort of like a stand rash or something here on the edge. I did notice that in regular lighting situations too. Here you can see the nicks and dings around the edges. That's going to be prevalent all over this particular example. Here you can see some clear coat wear and a whole bunch of other wear along the other edge. But it's a nice even glow everywhere. So nothing to worry about on this one. But I definitely want to get the headstock area good, just in case a buyer sees what I saw and gets freaked out. This way we have good proof that no, everything's peachy on both sides. However, just because something blacklights perfectly, that could also just mean it was all refinished at the exact same time. So you definitely have to use a keen eye and make sure you look over your guitars, even if you are blacklighting them. However, most repairs aren't that crazy to be blacklight proof, but there are people who specialize in things exactly like that. All said and done, this one weighs 6 pounds, 14.7 ounces. That's not a bad weight for a Flying V, but you remember that blue quilt top? That thing weighed less than this guitar. So I think now you guys fully understand why that thing is so crazy. And remember in that episode how I was saying that there was like a strange additional route down by the output jack? This guitar had that same thing. What it likely is the long drill that they use to put the cavity in probably ends up just going a little bit too far, and that's how sometimes that happens. But anyways, let's go ahead and plug this one in and hear how one of these things sounds with Tim Shaw PAF pickups. Say, this thing almost has a little bit of country tone in it for its clean tone. That's the bridge pickup. The neck. Very glassy. It almost has a slightly piezo-like element to it. Now, how's our middle position doing here? Now that we know all about the 1984 Scorpions Flying V, what are my final thoughts on this thing? Well, before I even talk about this, I just want to say the Scorpions is such a fantastic band. Like, you've heard most of their songs, even if you're not familiar with the name. But it's so hard to replicate their sound because they've got so many harmonies going on for everything. So it just sounds so pale and plain when you're just one guy trying to replicate all that. But this was a really fun guitar. I haven't checked out one of these 80s Flying Vs in a good long while. So it was nice to get to experience one that was a little bit more special than the rest. Ultimately, I think I would actually prefer the Dirty Fingers pickups in this one, because I found myself wanting maybe just a little bit more out of this. Now it could just be maybe I need to change my amp settings a bit or dial in my gain a bit more in my pedal, which I did have to do to get the tones that I was trying to replicate anyways. But this is just such a cool guitar, even if you're not a fan of their music. The whole black and white theme on this, half and half, straight up and down the center, is really cool. The frets are nice and low on this, so it makes sliding the strings very easy. But that's not because of fret wear, that's just the style of the frets of this era. I'm pretty used to it because I've had so many guitars, but if this is your first time getting a guitar from this era and you're used to the big, tall, modern frets, it will take a little bit to get used to. So if nothing else, I hope you enjoyed getting to learn about the history of this guitar. And if you're interested in being its next owner, it'll be for sale on my website and on Reverb. All right, Troglodytes, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's 80s episode, how about you check out my 70s Flying V that was stolen? That's a pretty good story. You can check it out here.